here seeking understanding, perhaps without knowing what it is you truly seek. For the heart is not a simple vessel, it is a labyrinth, and within it dwell shadows that whisper to you with the voice of love, even when they carry the tone of pain. This confusion between what wounds and what nurtures is not merely a moral failing, nor a naive error. It is a psychological mystery, one that lies deep in the ancient roots of the psyche, where love and suffering entwine like serpents around the same tree. The empath, by nature, is drawn toward the currents of another's inner life. It is not chosen consciously. It is as though their soul is porous, as though their skin has no boundary. They absorb the unspoken, the unshed tears, the unexpressed rage, the silent hunger of those around them. They do not simply see, they feel, and in that feeling, they often cannot distinguish where the self ends and the other begins. This, my friends, is a dangerous gift, for it can become a prison if the empath does not awaken to the truth of their own boundaries. Let me speak to you, not as a scholar dissecting concepts, but as one who has walked the corridors of dreams, who has entered the depths of the unconscious and returned with fragments of truth. In the unconscious, love is not the tender affection we imagine in our waking state. It is archetypal, rough, often destructive. Eros, the god of love, does not approach us as a polite suitor. He comes as fire, as hunger, as possession, and so the empath who feels another's pain is seized by an archetypal force that whispers, "This suffering you feel is love. This wound you bear proves your devotion." This sacrifice is the bond of your soul to theirs. But I tell you, this is a confusion born of shadow. For pain, when it is bound to love, often masks a deeper archetype, the archetype of the wounded child, the forsaken one, the soul abandoned at the threshold of tenderness. In every empath I have encountered, there is a child who once learned that love does not arrive freely, but must be purchased at the price of endurance. Perhaps a parent whose love was conditional, offered only when the child obeyed, only when the child absorbed their pain. Perhaps a family system where silence was demanded and the child became the emotional sponge that kept the fragile structure from collapsing. Thus the empath grows believing, not consciously, but in the marrow of their being, that to feel the pain of another is to prove loyalty, that to carry wounds for another is to secure belonging. This is why the empath often finds themselves entangled in destructive relationships, tethered to those who exploit their gift. They confuse intensity with intimacy, chaos with connection, the searing ache of longing with the steady warmth of love. They think, if I can endure this pain, it means I care. If I suffer alongside them, it means I am faithful. If I lose myself in their turmoil, it means I am one with them. But the unconscious plays its cruel trick. It binds them to the repetition of a primal wound, compelling them to reenact again and again the drama of the unloved child. Do you see then how archetypes move through your lives? They are not ideas, they are living realities, energies that seize the soul with mythic force. The empath is not merely an individual, but a vessel for an ancient drama, the sacrifice of the innocent for the sake of the beloved. Think of myth, where love is always proven through ordeal, Orpheus descending into Hades, Psyche enduring impossible trials, Christ crucified in the name of divine love. These patterns live in you, and without awareness, they command you. I must warn you, when love and pain are fused in the unconscious, the soul becomes addicted to suffering. You will return to it as one returns to the fire, knowing it burns, but unable to resist the hypnotic glow. It is as though the psyche whispers, if love does not hurt, it is not real. This is the great lie, the counterfeit coin of the unconscious, minted in the shadows of childhood, and passed from hand to hand in the currency of relationships. Imagine a dream. You are walking through a forest at dusk, and you come upon a cottage with its windows glowing warm with light. You enter, hoping for refuge, and inside you find a table laden with bread and wine. But each time you reach to take it, the figure who offers it withdraws their hand and demands, first, you must bleed. First, you must hurt. And because you are hungry, because you are lonely, you consent. You wound yourself to prove your worthiness. The bread is never truly given. It is earned with pain. This is the dream of the empath, and it repeats until one awakens. Yet, I tell you, awakening is not easy. It is not a matter of mere willpower or knowledge. It requires the confrontation with shadow. It requires you to see the archetype moving through you and to speak to it as one speaks to a living God. I see you. I know your name. You are not love. You are the ghost of love. The counterfeit that feeds on suffering. Only when you have this dialogue within can you begin to separate the golden thread of true love from the dark knot of pain. True love, my friends, does not demand self-destruction. It does not require you to dissolve into another suffering as though that were your purpose. True love is creative. It expands. It nourishes both souls without draining either. It is not an ordeal. Though it requires sacrifice, it is not agony. Though it requires vulnerability, it is a fire that warms, not one that consumes. And yet, to recognize this, the empaths must first walk through their own underworld, must confront the child within who still believes pain is the price of belonging. Do you not feel this within yourselves? Do you not sense how often your longing leads you back to the very chains that bind you? You say to yourselves, but they need me. Without me, they will collapse. Without my sacrifice, they will be lost. And so you give, and you give until your own soul is emptied. But in truth, this is not love. It is possession by the archetype of the Savior, the martyr, the healer who bleeds to restore others. And though these images may appear noble, when they are unconscious, they devour you. I tell you this, not to condemn, but to awaken. The path of individuation is the path of becoming conscious, of seeing clearly where you have been ensnared by shadow. The empath must learn to distinguish between resonance and enmeshment, between compassion and compulsion, between love and the addiction to pain. This is no simple task, for the archetypes are strong and the child within clings to its illusions, but it is possible For I have seen it. I have walked with those who were once lost in the maze of their own empathy, who mistook wounds for bonds, and I have watched them step into the light of their own true self. The first step is awareness, to feel the pull of another's suffering and to pause, to ask, is this mine or is this theirs? Do I carry this to heal or do I carry it to feel loved? In that question lies the doorway to freedom. The unconscious seeks to bind you in repetition, but the conscious ego, when it stands firm in its center, can break the spell. This is the warning I give you. Empathy without consciousness is slavery. It is not the path of love, but the path of self-annihilation. And yet, empathy with awareness becomes a sacred gift, a bridge of understanding that does not destroy, but unites. The choice lies within you, and it begins by recognizing that pain is not proof of love. As we move deeper into this exploration, I will lead you further into the dreamscape of the soul, where the archetypes dwell, where the shadow whispers, and where the true self waits to be discovered. But for now, hold this truth close. You are not called to bleed endlessly for others. You are called to awaken, to love with clarity, and to distinguish the voice of love from the echo of wounds. Only then will you cease to confuse pain with love, and only then will you step into the fullness of who you truly are. When we speak of love, most imagine a shining flame that warms, a harmony of hearts that beats in unison. Yet, in the unconscious, love often appears not as harmony, but as a wound. It is here that the empath finds themselves ensnared, for their inner compass is tuned not to the gentle rhythms of affection, but to the frequency of suffering. To understand this, you must descend with me once more into the dreamlike landscape of the psyche, where archetypes live and where your own patterns are woven. Consider the archetype of the mother. To the child, she is the first universe, the source of nourishment and safety. But if her love is inconsistent, bound up in her own unresolved suffering, then the child learns that love is not steady but erratic, not safe but dangerous, not nourishing but demanding. The empath, growing under such influence, learns to read every subtle vibration, every flicker in the emotional weather of the household. As though survival depends upon it, they learn to anticipate storms before they break, to soothe the tempests of others, to silence their own needs so that another may be calmed. Thus, empathy is born not as a gift but as a defense, an exquisite sensitivity forged in the fires of uncertainty. In later life, this sensitivity becomes confused with love itself. The adult empath encounters another person who radiates pain, who trembles with their own inner chaos, and something ancient stirs within them. It is the familiar dance, the same ache that once tied them to survival. They think this is intimacy, this is connection, this is love. Yet what they are truly meeting is their own past. Projected outward into the figure before them, they are not loving the other as they are loving the reflection of the wound they carry within themselves. Dreams often reveal this confusion with startling clarity. I recall a dream recounted to me by a young woman who always found herself drawn to men who could not give her what she longed for. In her dream, she stood at the edge of a vast ocean. A man she loved was drowning, thrashing in the waves, calling out her name. She leapt in, fighting the tide, pulling him towards shore. But as she dragged him closer, she felt her strength fading, her own body sinking beneath the water. Just before she went under, she looked into his eyes and saw not gratitude, but indifference. He had no awareness of her sacrifice, no recognition of her devotion. And she awoke with terror, her body trembling. This dream is an image of the empath's plight. They dive again and again into the ocean of another's suffering, believing rescue is proof of love, yet the one they save may not even see them, may not even care, and in the process, they themselves are lost. The ocean, of course, is the archetype of the unconscious, and to drown in it is to be swallowed by forces beyond one's control. The empath risks becoming possessed by the archetype of the savior, and in doing so, loses their own soul to the abyss. Why then does the empath not resist? Why do they not simply say no, step back, choose a love that does not wound, because the unconscious compels them to repeat? The psyche is not content with unresolved trauma, it seeks to replay it, hoping for resolution, but often delivering only the same outcome in different guises. This is what Freud called the compulsion to repeat, but I saw it more deeply as the soul's attempt to heal through reenactment. The child who could not secure unconditional love seeks in every partner, every friend, to rewrite the story. If I can endure their pain, the psyche whispers, then at last I will be worthy. If I can suffer enough, the love will finally arrive. But it never does, for the archetype plays its script faithfully, and the empath is trapped in a theater of ghosts. The shadow, too, has its role here, for the empath does not only carry the light of compassion, they also carry repressed anger, unacknowledged resentment, unspoken needs. When these are denied, they turn inward, becoming poison. Outwardly, the empath appears endlessly giving, endlessly forgiving, but within there is a bitterness that grows, a silent fury at the injustice of their role. This is the shadow of the empath, the wounded healer who secretly longs to be healed, to the savior who secretly longs to be saved. Until this shadow is faced, the empath will continue to cloak pain in the garments of love, never admitting the deeper hunger that gnaws within. I ask you, then, how often have you mistaken your own compulsion for compassion? How often have you called sacrifice devotion, when in truth it was fear of abandonment? These questions are not meant to condemn, but to awaken, for the path of individuation demands that we confront these illusions, that we stand before the mirror of our relationships and recognize the archetypes at play. To individuate as an empath is to learn the sacred art of discernment. It is to feel the pull of another's suffering and to ask, is this my calling? Or is this my compulsion? Is this love? Or is this the shadow of my childhood wound seeking repetition? It is to step back from the flood of emotions and to anchor oneself in the self of the inner center that is neither devoured by others nor detached in cold indifference. You must understand, love is not found in self-abandonment. Love is not found in dissolving into another's pain. Love is born when two souls meet in wholeness, when each brings their fullness to the encounter, not their emptiness. This is why the confusion of pain with love is so dangerous. It keeps both souls trapped in incompleteness, chained to roles of rescuer and victim, martyr and tyrant. True love does not require these masks. True love is born when the masks fall away, when shadow is integrated, when the soul no longer clings to suffering as its proof of worth. Imagine again a dream. You walk into a cathedral, vast and silent. At the altar stands a figure robed in light. You approach, believing this to be love itself. But as you draw near, you see that beneath the robes, the figure bleeds endlessly, a wound that never heals. And as you reach to embrace them, their blood stains your hands, your heart, your very soul. You think you are touching love, but you are only touching pain dressed in sacred clothing. This is the dream of the empath who has not yet awakened. But there is another possibility. In another dream, the same figure stands at the altar, and when you draw near, they hold out not wounds, but bread, not blood, but wine. And they say, love does not ask you to bleed, it asks you to live. This is the transformation I invite you toward, to see the archetype clearly, to know when you are worshipping pain under the guise of love, and to choose instead the path of true eros, which is creative, generative, life-giving. The self, the center of the psyche, calls you not to self-destruction, but to wholeness. And in wholeness, empathy becomes not a chain, but a gift, not a wound, but a bridge. You must dare to face the loneliness that arises when you no longer define yourself by another's suffering. For many empaths, this loneliness is unbearable. It feels as though the soul is empty, without the constant drama of rescue and sacrifice. But it is only in this solitude that the true self emerges, that you discover you are not merely an echo of others' pain, but a being with your own essence, your own destiny. In that solitude, love is redefined, not as pain endured, but as life shared. So let this be the warning, and also the invitation. Awaken from the dream where pain masquerades as love. See the archetype, confront the shadow. Dare to step into the stillness of your own center. Only then will you cease to drown in the oceans of others. And only then will you know the love that liberates rather than binds. The deeper we venture into this mystery, the clearer it becomes that the confusion between pain and love is not a personal weakness, but an archetypal drama that has been enacted since the dawn of humanity. The empath is the vessel through which this drama plays itself out, and until awareness dawns, they remain captive to its script. It is like being possessed by a god. One does not merely choose, one is chosen, seized by an energy greater than oneself. The archetype that governs much of this confusion is the figure of the wounded healer. You may know it in mythology, Chiron, the centaur who could heal others but could never heal his own wound. This image lives deeply within the empath. They sense the pain of the world as though it were etched upon their own body, and they rush to soothe it. But beneath their hands, beneath their kindness, lies a wound that never seems to close. They are both healer and sufferer, savior and victim, caught in an eternal paradox. Why does the wounded healer continue to give? Because the wound is also their source of meaning. Without the wound, they fear they are nothing. Their very identity becomes tied to suffering, both their own and that of others. If they were to release it, they would feel empty, rootless, purposeless. Thus, they cling to pain, mistaking it for love, because without it they fear they would not exist at all. But I tell you, this is the deception of the shadow. For the shadow is not only the darkness you reject, it is also the unlived life, the parts of you that remain unseen, because you are too bound to your wound. In the empaths, the shadow often contains their own joy, their own strength, their own desire to be loved without condition. These become buried beneath the mask of the healer, hidden beneath the endless devotion to others' needs. And so the empath continues to play the role confusing pain with love, because to step outside the role would mean confronting the terrifying possibility of their own unlived self. Dreams often present this conflict with brutal clarity. I once heard the dream of a man who spent his life caring for partners who were self-destructive, believing this was proof of his devotion. In the dream, he carried a lantern through a dark forest, searching for a wounded animal. At last, he found it, a wolf snarling in pain, its leg trapped in iron. He freed it, but as soon as the wolf was loose, it turned and bit his hand, tearing flesh from bone. He stumbled backward, lantern falling, light extinguished, and he awoke in terror. The wolf, of course, is the archetype of instinct, raw and untamed. By rescuing it, he thought he was offering love. But the dream revealed the truth. His unconscious believed that love required him to be wounded in the process, that devotion without pain was meaningless. How many of you have lived this dream without realizing it? How many times have you set yourself on fire to warm another, only to be consumed by your own flames? This is not love. It is compulsion. The compulsion of the archetype, the spell of the shadow. To free oneself from this spell, one must turn inward. One must confront the inner wound not as a curse, but as a teacher. Pain is not love, but it is a messenger. It points to the place where love has been distorted, where the soul has confused sacrifice with intimacy. The task of individuation is to listen to this messenger, to descend into the wound and discover what lies beneath it. Often, beneath the wound, one finds the forgotten child, still waiting for the love that was denied. This child must be met, not with sacrifice, but with compassion, not with endurance, but with acknowledgement. For until the inner child is recognized, the empath will continue to seek healing through others, confusing their pain with a proof of love. Let me speak plainly. The empath must learn to turn their empathy inward. This does not mean abandoning others, but it means first offering to oneself what one so readily gives away. It means standing before the mirror of the soul and saying, my suffering is not proof of my worth. My wounds do not define my love. I am not bound to bleed in order to belong. This is an act of great courage, for it means breaking the pattern that has defined one's entire existence. It is to walk away from the stage where the archetypes have bound you, and to risk stepping into the unknown of your own true self and what is found there. At first, there is silence. The empath, without the drama of others' suffering, feels emptiness, as though the world has lost its color. But in that silence, in that emptiness, something begins to emerge. The self, the deeper center of the psyche, begins to speak, and its voice is different from the voice of the wound. It does not say, "You are loved because you suffer." It says, "You are loved because you are..." This is the turning point, the moment when empathy becomes conscious, when the wounded healer transforms. They no longer enter relationships to prove their worth through sacrifice. They enter to share their wholeness. They no longer drown in the oceans of others. They stand on the shore, extending a hand, but refusing to lose themselves. They no longer confuse pain with love. They recognize pain as a teacher, but love as a creative force that brings life, not death. Think of a dream where the empath returns to the same ocean. This time, the one they love is still drowning, still thrashing in the waves. But instead of diving in blindly, the empath stands firm on the shore. They throw a rope, they extend their strength, but they do not abandon themselves to the abyss. If the other takes hold, they are lifted. If not, the empath does not perish. This is not abandonment, it is wisdom. For true love does not require you to drown. It requires you to remain alive, to bring your full self into the encounter. This, then, is a warning and a hope. If you continue to equate love with pain, you will forever remain chained to the archetype of the wounded healer, sacrificing yourself endlessly to shadows that can never be satisfied. But if you dare to separate them, to see pain as a messenger and love as a creative fire, you will be transformed. You will discover that empathy, when rooted in the self, is not a prison, but a gift, not a wound, but a bridge. And I say to you, this transformation is not only for your sake, but for the sake of the world. For the world does not need more martyrs consumed by others' suffering. The world needs conscious souls who can stand firm in their center, who can love without annihilating themselves, who can bring healing without losing wholeness. The empath, awakened, becomes such a soul. They embody the paradox of compassion and strength, tenderness and clarity. They become not a rescuer, but a creator of true relationship, where love is not confusion, but revelation. So I invite you, step out of the labyrinths of pain and love entwined, see the archetypes at play, confront your shadow, embrace your inner child. In doing so, you will cease to confuse pain with love, and you will discover love in its truest form, not as suffering endured, but as life shared, as wholeness meeting wholeness, as the eternal fire that gives light without consuming. We stand now at the threshold of transformation, where the old illusions must be surrendered and the deeper truth embraced. The empath who has lived as prisoner to the archetype of suffering, who has mistaken agony for intimacy and wounds for bonds, must now turn their gaze inward and ask, what is the nature of love when freed from pain? This is not a theoretical question, but a living riddle, one that each soul must answer in the crucible of their own experience. For when the empath ceases to bleed for others, they feel, at first, abandoned by meaning, the old drama, the endless cycle of rescue and loss gave a rhythm to life, however destructive. Without it, silence falls, and silence can be terrifying. It is as though one has been living in the roar of a storm, and suddenly it ends. At first, the quiet feels empty, hollow, unbearable. But in truth, it is the womb of the new self, waiting to be born. This is why individuation often feels like death. It is the death of the false self, the roles and patterns that once gave identity but were chains in disguise. For the empath, individuation demands the death of the savior, the martyr, the endless healer, and when those masks fall away, the naked soul trembles, wondering if it has any worth without them. But I assure you, this trembling is the prelude to awakening. Love, when freed from pain, is not less intense, it is more, for it is no longer bound by the compulsion of wounds, it is liberated into the fullness of creation. Love that is not confused with suffering becomes a source of strength, not depletion. A fire that illuminates, not consumes. It is eros in its true form, not merely desire, not merely sacrifice, but the sacred energy that binds soul to soul without annihilation. Let us imagine a dream, one that reveals this transformation. You walk once more through the forest where you once sought the wounded animal, the snarling wolf that bit your hand. But now the forest is different. It is brighter, the shadows less oppressive. In the clearing, you see not a wounded creature, but a magnificent stag, its antlers crowned with light. It does not need rescue, nor does it demand sacrifice. Instead, it meets your gaze with majesty. And you feel not compulsion, but communion. You do not lose yourself. In its presence, you expand. This dream is the image of love when it is no longer mistaken for pain, a meeting of beings in their wholeness, a recognition that does not devour but affirms. And so I say to you, do not fear the silence that follows the breaking of your chains. Do not cling to the wound as though it were your only identity. Step into the stillness, into the mystery, and allow the deeper self to emerge. For it is in this emergence that you will discover what love truly is: not pain endured, but wholeness shared. The empath's gift is not meant for slavery, but for creation. When they awaken, they become a bridge between souls, not by carrying others' suffering within themselves, but by radiating the presence of wholeness that invites healing in others. They no longer rescue by drowning alongside, they heal by standing firm, by embodying the truth that love does not require destruction. This is the true calling of empathy, not to confuse pain with love, but to transform the memory of pain into the wisdom of love. And here lies the mystical paradox. Only by walking through the valley of confusion, only by suffering the illusion that pain is love, can the empath come to this awakening. The wound itself becomes the teacher, the shadow becomes the guide, for in facing the darkness, one learns to distinguish the counterfeit from the real. This is why suffering has meaning. Though it is not love itself, it is the doorway to love, if one dares to pass through consciously. So let us return to the archetype of the wounded healer. Jung, though wounded, taught others the art of healing. His wound did not define him. It became the vessel through which he brought wisdom to the world. This is the destiny of the empath, not to remain chained to their wound, but to transmute it, to turn suffering into insight, pain into compassion, confusion into clarity. In doing so, they become not martyrs but initiates, not victims but creators. What does this look like in the living of life? It looks like the refusal to equate intensity with intimacy. It looks like choosing partners who offer reciprocity, not chaos. It looks like saying no when the old compulsion whispers yes. It looks like standing firm in solitude until a love arrives that does not demand self-annihilation. It looks like remembering again and again that you are not loved because you suffer, you are loved because you are. The path is not easy, but it is sacred. Each time you resist the temptation to confuse pain with love, you take a step toward individuation. Each time you turn inward to comfort the child within rather than sacrificing yourself for another, you weave a new pattern in the fabric of your soul. Each time you choose to remain whole rather than fragment for another's sake, you align more deeply with the self, the eternal center of your being. And when at last this integration is complete, you will find that love itself has transformed. It is no longer the frantic search for rescue, no longer the hunger to prove worth through suffering. It is a calm fire, a steady presence, a mystery that deepens without devouring. It is, at last, the union of souls in truth, not in illusion. So hear my final words, as though spoken in the stillness of your own unconscious. Do not confuse pain with love. Recognize the shadow that binds them. Confront the archetype that compels you and step into the wholeness that awaits. Your empathy is not a curse but a gift. When it is conscious, your wound is not your prison but your initiation. When it is integrated and your love is not suffering endured but life shared, when you finally awaken to the truth that you are worthy without bleeding, this is my warning, and it is also my blessing. For the path of the empath, though fraught with illusion, leads ultimately to revelation. And when at last you stand in the light of your own self, you will know love not as pain, but as the eternal fire that binds the human soul to the mystery of life itself.